Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Ryan with System.Debug. You'll notice that Brian and Ray aren't with me, but I do have a special guest. And tonight we are going to talk about, is your Salesforce org secure? So sit tight and we'll be right with you. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode of System.Debug. We are talking about security, but before we get there, I have a couple of quick things I want to talk about. You will notice that my cohorts, Brian and Raymond, are not here, and that is because they are currently dealing with Hurricane Irma down in Atlanta. It's made landfall, as you all know. Everybody's been watching it. It kept me from going to Disney this week. And it's had widespread destruction everywhere. So they are handling what they need to handle, and I'm going to do my best to fly solo tonight. Interesting to note. So we've had Hurricane Irma, and as you all recall, not so long ago, we had Hurricane Harvey. And in an effort to support those victims of Hurricane Harvey who have been, without food and water and places to stay and stuff, System.Debug has teamed up with several of our podcasting cohorts like To Wit, and I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. I apologize. The Gift Squad's part of it as well. We have created a small campaign where we called it HungerCast 17. And we are selling t-shirts of the various types of podcasts. So you can get one with System.Debug, you can get one with To Wit, you can get one with the Gift Squad, you can get one that's got all of them. And we will post the link for that. All of the proceeds will go to Feeding Texas in an effort, again, to support everything that's been happening down in the Houston area. So with that said, we have a couple of upcoming events here in the Salesforce community. We have Surfforce next week, I believe, in Ireland. If you're lucky enough to go to that, enjoy that. It should be a good time. And then following that is India Dreamin', the first community Dreamin' event in India, I believe. And that is on September 30th. And then do not forget, of course, how could you? Dreamforce is coming up November 6th through the 9th. We still don't have any word on the band, but if you happen to catch the podcast not long ago, I think it's called On the Road to Trailhead, or no, On the Road to Dreamforce. Sorry about that. They did release images of the bag. Some mixed feelings about that. So be looking for that. Tonight, however, we have a special guest with us. We have Wakas from DigitSec Inc. Security, and tonight we are going to be talking all about securing your Salesforce org. So without any further ado, I would like to bring Wakas in there. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, hey, it looks like we do have Raymond. He is actually in. I apologize. I was reading my cheat sheet, yeah. Raymond. I didn't see you.
No, you're good. You're good. I mean, I just popped in. Sorry.
No, you're good.
We got power outages and stuff going all over, so I'm phoning it in.
Stay as long as you can, man. But without any further ado, we're going to introduce Wakas, and let's talk about security. I'm sure we're going to have some questions. I know I will have some. We have some written that we wanted to make sure we talked about. But if you're watching us on the video chat, please go ahead and put your responses in there, or tweet at System.Debug, or tweet my personal account if you follow me, and we'll do your best to get your questions answered. So with that, take it away, Wakas.
Well, thank you very much. It's very happy and excited to be here talking to you guys. And thank you, Raymond, for dialing in with your phone. I know there's other things happening, and appreciate you taking the time out, and hope everybody's safe down there. And the people who are affected by these devastating hurricanes are able to recover. So as has been mentioned, I'll be talking to you about security. And with the recent news of a compromise of Equifax, it's in the news and it's in everybody's mind. Interestingly, Salesforce as a platform invests heavily in security and trust, and they have a big ecosystem where they support and provide a lot of guidance when it comes to developing securely on the platform. So my hope today is to kind of address the security aspects of the platform itself, some of the features and controls, and also some of the things which people sometimes don't understand when it comes to security and Salesforce. So the number one myth that I can start off with is that when people start using SaaS platforms, and Salesforce is an example of that, they assume and they think that all of their security needs will be basically covered by the platform provider, such as Salesforce in this instance. But what they don't realize or understand is that there's a lot of out-of-the-box functionality and features which are utilized, and it will be very hard to find somebody using straight out-of-the-box Salesforce. Salesforce started off as, you know, sort of they still have that icon of no software, but interestingly, on the same note, they tout about, you know, over 300, you know, over 3 million developers. So there is a disconnect between what consumers may understand of the platform and what the platform is able to provide. So what happens is that because of this disconnect, there is a lot of security implications when people write their own code, when they customize Salesforce. And one thing that we can maybe anecdotally share is that not too long ago, ICANN, which is the backbone of the internet, because they manage, you know, name services and large, you know, DNS accounts, was their Salesforce instance was compromised. And interestingly, what was unique about this compromise is that their data was stolen over 330 times. So what that indicates is, again, this notion that if you're on this platform, you don't have to worry about security. And if you are on this platform, you don't even need to, you know, monitor what's happening in this environment from a security perspective. So imagine, you know, window broken into 330 times, or same, you know, somebody coming from the same window over 330 times in your house, and then, you know, not knowing that, you know, what they took. So that again indicates the importance of security and also the lack of awareness when it comes to Salesforce. So let's maybe start off by looking at some Salesforce configurations. So I'm going to share out a small slide deck here, and I'm going to basically show you some basic configurations when it comes to Salesforce. And so interestingly, Salesforce can be configured in many different ways. And as you can see, I still have a hard time, you know, understanding why these even exist. But you can configure your Salesforce, for example, password policies to say your password should never expire. There shouldn't be any history, so you can set the same password, which is kind of an oxymoron, because if the password doesn't expire, you know, so who's going to change the password? And then the minimum length could be, you know, 5 characters. It doesn't need to be complex. You could use 5, you know, characters such as A, B, C, D, E, F, and that'll basically be, you know, enough for your password. And similarly, there is no limit as to how many invalid login attempts somebody can make. So that's basically inviting someone to, you know, guess people's passwords. What's interesting is, again, the last 2 settings, which it says that, you know, there's no limit in invalid login attempts, but you could still set a lockout period, which wouldn't get enforced. Then, you know, you could grant somebody permission to modify all data. You can grant somebody permissions to view encrypted data. Point being, you know, there is a lot of security sensitive configurations when it comes to Salesforce. And unless, you know, companies are aware of those and looking out for what their current posture is, they may be opening themselves to an attack. So going back to basically what does Salesforce itself says, right? The platform itself does, like I said, a lot to protect its customers and data. They have invested heavily in trust, and they do a great job. That out of the box, Salesforce hasn't suffered any major security issues. But when you have companies customizing data, have third-party integrations and what have you, then basically they politely say, and I've highlighted this, that protecting your data is a joint responsibility between you and Salesforce. So in other words, if you customize things and you open your org up to an attack, Salesforce is not really responsible. It's because of your customizations that attack vector exists. So that's basically, on a high level, the challenge that we're trying to address. So let's look at one more, common misconception when it comes to Salesforce. When we've reviewed a lot of applications and custom code, one of the things that we find a lot is around authorization bypass issues. And we've had developers come back and say, hey, Salesforce IDs, nobody can guess them, they're so complex. And so we have to point them to guidance provided by Salesforce, which basically says that these are, incrementing ASCII characters. They may look complex on the surface, but they're basically being incremented by each record. So given an ID, a malicious user is able to enumerate other IDs, but just incrementing the characters. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding from this simple perspective that companies and developers don't understand that they need to implement proper authorization controls. And even if these were pseudo-random, from a security perspective, it's not good to just hide behind a pseudo-random identifier. They should definitely still be implementing proper authorization controls.
I do have a question for you really quick.
Sure.
With respect to those incrementing IDs, do you know, because I don't know, obviously if you're writing Apex code, you want to make sure that you're checking that whomever's requesting that record can actually see that, which, I can see that makes sense. But what about those folks that don't have a lot of code in their org and their standard layouts? What prevents people from just doing A, then B, then C, then D to get through all the different ones? If you're using like a standard page layout, you have no hook in there to say, hey, if this person's requesting it, they can't see it because they're not even in our org, so to speak.
Right, so that's a good question. So in the case where you're using the standard page layouts and the standard interface that's provided by Salesforce, authorization checks are based on your permission set in your roles. So if you have an overly permissive role set or permission set, and a user is able to enumerate IDs, they're going to be able to access those objects directly, even if the UI didn't provide it to them because of some filtering or what have you. But if the permission sets don't allow them, then the Salesforce platform, of course, would enforce authorization. So if somebody has modify all data access, they could use standard Salesforce interface to enumerate objects using this technique. But if they're just limited to a certain group of objects and a certain criteria, then Salesforce the platform is going to enforce that authorization for that user, and so it's going to protect and out of the box provide that authorization for the platform.
Cool.
So basically, if you look at Salesforce, Salesforce starts off as out of the box, users perhaps using certain features and functionality, whether that's Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, or IoT or what have you. But soon it draws these tentacles. So people enable Web2 case, Web2 lead. So now they have anonymous users sending data, and then they hire a bunch of developers to write custom code, custom applications, whether that's Lightning components or native Visualforce pages or controllers. Then they start integrating third-party systems and ERP systems, and so as the platform grows, the attack surface grows as well. So from a security perspective, it's very important to understand the overall threat picture for your Salesforce environment. So we encourage our customers to look at Salesforce holistically, and see where data is coming from, where it's going, who is it has access to, what are the actors in your system. Many times people say, hey, we just trust our sales team. But little do they realize that they have, third-party consultants or even anonymous users from the web interacting with their Salesforce instance. And there is, completely untrusted data in their system. So it's important to understand the whole attack surface when it comes to Salesforce, and then see if you have adequate controls for your data.
Yeah, I don't think about that very often, where you use perhaps one app that's integrating to attack another app. I think a lot of people overlook that.
Yeah, so we've seen that, especially with web-based technologies, there's a lot of controls that are put in place to have some protection against, one app attacking another app, or, one app, basically impacting the security of the whole system. But within an org, that certainly can happen, because when you deploy server-side code, that code actually has access to a lot more than a typical user would have access to from the interface, right? So if you have one bad actor in the system, that can have a greater impact, because they can have more access to data, and APIs and what have you. So it's important to understand that dynamics as well, and look at what other third-party apps you have in your environment, and whether they've been vetted or looked at as well or not.
Okay.
So this is basically where we come in. So we are a security company. We've been doing a lot of security work on Salesforce, and also other web applications. We were talking about Equifax earlier. According to what we know, and we don't know a whole lot, we just know that 143 million sensitive records were compromised. But interestingly, the small bit detail that they did release was that it was a web-based exploit. So if you look at Salesforce, it's basically a web-based platform, which is no different than a traditional web application. If you start customizing it, you're able to write new pages, you can write server-side code, you can write APIs, you can consume APIs, you can integrate into different batch processing and things like that. So which is basically very feature rich, which is why it's one of the largest SaaS platforms out there. But with that richness, we've found over the years that when we reviewed custom development on the platform itself, we would find a lot of issues which can impact security. And given that this is a web-based platform, it has a lot of exposure. And so as we were doing reviews specifically for Salesforce, we found that there is no possible way of scaling what we were doing across the thousands of customers that Salesforce has. So we ended up automating some of the tests that we were doing, and getting good coverage from a security perspective for our customers. And so we've developed S4, which is basically SaaS security scanner for Salesforce, and it is written in Apex, which is the Salesforce development language. It is native to the platform. So when customers deploy this, it gets deployed within a customer's org. We don't get access to any data or code or IP. it sort of stays within the sandbox security model of Salesforce. Now, what do we do under the hood is that we have static code analysis, which is basically analyzing the code and finding issues inside the code and identifying, why these issues exist and how to go about fixing that. The second thing that we do, which is kind of unique, and it is something that a lot of other tools don't provide, is the ability to do what we call like runtime testing or fuzz testing, which basically is a loose term to fault injection testing. So you can look at it as a way of stress testing a wing on an airplane or crash testing a car. Basically, we take the application, the custom code within an org, and we send it a lot of bad malicious data. And in the demo, I'll show you how that looks. But basically, we monitor the environment and see what breaks and what doesn't break. And whatever breaks, we log that and we track that as a security finding that the customers can then take, internalize, and fix. We also do some signature-based testing. So basically, we look for like certain types of anomalies within the code, which are known to cause security issues. So we'll identify those issues as well. And since we're doing runtime testing, the exploits that we provide have no false positives because we only find them if something breaks. So when we provide a URL or a request type, then we know that this is a functioning exploit. We also have coverage for lightning components, and we cover those in our testing, both static code analysis and the white box runtime testing.
Wow, that's cool.
And so basically, this could be used for a bunch of compliance efforts. You could scale this out. So the fact that we're on the platform, you could deploy it into thousands of orgs or hundreds of orgs, and each would run within their own instance. And so there's, the added scalability of just like a cloud provider. And then, there are no code limits, and, customers can run scans as much as they like and whenever they feel like doing it.
I get the impression from the bottom line there that says it means nothing ever leaves your Salesforce sandbox. So does this only install into a sandbox? So the idea being, obviously, you're running all of these before you deploy to production, but does that mean you're not scanning your production org as well?
You can certainly do it in your production environment as well, but the ideal case is that you address these issues before you go live, right?
Right.
You don't want security bugs in your production org, ideally. So our recommendation is that this tool is best, suited for your dev test environments, where you're constantly changing things, and before you go live, you use this tool, or you could use it on an ongoing basis as you make changes. But this could be, a tool that helps you gain assurance before you ship into production.
Right.
But if there are companies who want to look at what's there in the production right now, even those, we recommend that you create a sandbox of what you have there and then you run it there, because of the fact that we do runtime testing, and it may create bad data in production for them to then scrub.
Okay.
So I've talked about this a little bit already. So on a more simplistic view is that we basically do 4 key things. We look at the environment, if there's configurational issues that present a security challenge for a Salesforce org, we would identify that, we'll log that, we'll look at the code, we generate the custom runtime fuzzer, and then we actually launch that fuzzer for that particular instance, and then do the testing and then provide guidance. So how do we report the things? We basically save the findings as Salesforce cases. And if companies utilize some other bug tracking system, they can always use, the standard export features of Salesforce to export these out, and put them in a different bug tracking system. But we, by design, use the case object. We just create a security type case so that many companies and customers use the standard case objects for triaging functional bugs and what have you. So it kind of fits well with their use case. But if there's needs of doing it in a different way, we can certainly help our customers do that as well. So we provide guidance on what the type of issue is, why this is bad, what is the severity rating, so high, medium, low, and how would somebody go about fixing this issue. So with that, I'd like to jump into the demo and show you kind of what this looks like.
Cool.
So as you probably know, if you have Salesforce, available for you, any sandbox or dev environment, and if you deploy any AppExchange app, it's available through the dropdown. Our app is called Salesforce Security Scan. The interface is very simple. Users really have the ability to start or stop a scan. And once a user initiates a scan, the whole process is supposed to be unattended. Everything that happens doesn't need any user interaction unless there is some reason to come back and look at where you are. And once the scan completes, an email is sent to the user who started the scan to come back and have a look, and also other users who may be interested in the results.
That's cool. So is this going to use these scans? Do you guys follow like OWASP top 10 or something to scan for, or do you have your list of proprietary things that you're scanning for? Or, I'm just trying to get an idea of, the OWASP was like, check for your SQL injection and cross-site scripting and things like that. Is that kind of what you guys used for a template on that, or?
Correct. Yep. So we do cover the OWASP vulnerabilities. We also cover a lot of the guidance that comes from Salesforce themselves. Their security guide tells you to write code in a certain way to protect yourself against certain types of attack. So we cover the OWASP issues and also all the security guidance that comes on Salesforce, and we check against those issues.
Cool. And obviously the length of time to do a scan probably depends heavily on the size of the org, right? How as many classes as you got, the size of those classes, et cetera, I assume.
Yeah. And so since we're doing a pretty intensive scan, so we're looking at code, and you could have controllers with thousands of lines of code and thousands of controllers sometimes. So yeah, it depends really on the size of the org, the amount of code, the amount of customization, and the complexity of different different components. So this particular one doesn't have a lot of code because it's for demo purposes. If it took a couple hours, I don't know if anybody will come to a demo. But this particular scan takes about 8 minutes or so. And right now you can probably see the runtime tester, which we call loosely fuzzer, which is basically, taking each of the inputs or the attack vectors available in an org and, basically throwing malicious data at it and then monitoring the environment, how it responds to those attacks. And then if something breaks, then we know it's exploitable. We know we have high confidence in reporting that to our customer, and then that's when we report a finding.
So
go ahead.
As I say, the curious part of me has to ask about, so this is an app and an app exchange. Did you have to work really closely with Salesforce to, I guess, kind of get the permissions to really throw this kind of stuff at an org, considering like, if this thing exploded and y'all sold this, like, everybody had it and they were constantly running these, quasi attacks for all intents and purposes. Did you, I'm really curious how that worked with in working with Salesforce to get this product to market, as far as, you know, hey, we're essentially going to be hacking inside of all these orgs. You know, I'm just curious, were there any obstacles to that?
That's a really good question. So if anything, we've received positive support from Salesforce.
Awesome.
Because as I said, you know, their number one concern is trust and security. So if there's an app that helps that for customers, I think it's a win-win for them. That being said, a more technical question that you might ask was, you know, the load and the requests and the activities that we're doing. That again is something that can happen naturally in an org anyways, when somebody's trying to attack. So if anything, it makes Salesforce more resilient. If it makes our customers more resilient, and they're able to, you know, not only fix bugs before they're exploited, but they're also able to see how their application withstands an attack, and you know, practically demonstrate some value. So over the the time that we've tested, it has been, I hope we are not been a cause of an outage on Salesforce side, but we haven't had anything come back saying that, you know, because of your activities, we had a negative impact on our you know, use of the platform. And one of the reasons we also recommend using the dev and test environments is that you know, production is always not getting impacted by what we're doing, which is, you know, going to be potentially destructive testing.
Right. Right. That makes perfect sense. That's cool. I was just curious. I figured it had to be kind of, I want to say difficult, but there had to be some detail, I'm sure, put into that relationship. So I was just curious how, you know, if you ran into any obstacles. So no, this is cool. I see we're at like 66% right now. So
yep. So yeah, so one of the things definitely was that, you know, we're an app exchange app like any other app. So interestingly, I was on a call with Salesforce, and they say, you know, your app has to pass the security review. And I basically jokingly said that if our app doesn't pass security review, then we're in the wrong business. We're helping people secure their assets, and if we are, you know, not secure ourselves, then perhaps, yeah, we're in the wrong business. So we're definitely aware of some of the challenges that come with being another app on the App Exchange. So we've made sure that our application is completely self-contained, and it's you know, up to the standard of security itself. And once the customers deploy this, we're sort of blind from the results. So those findings are specifically for the customer. They can only, you know, they can come back to us for assistance on, you know, how to go about addressing this thing. And if they like to share something, they can. But we don't get any data back. We don't get any findings. We don't get any bugs or anything of that nature. Because we feel that sensitive data that is specific to a customer, that, you know, if they choose to, they should be able to share that. But if they don't, by default, it should stay with where they deployed it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I know there are companies out there that, you know, they're required to run these security scans, and then, you know, there's a third party asking for these reports, and there's a lot of red tape mixed into sharing such information for a lot of companies, particularly if you're dealing with financial stuff, right? So yeah, I mean, it's really good that you brought that up about, you know, hey, the reports, they don't come back to you folks at all. It stays within the org, which is very important, I think. We do have a question from Brian, who has managed to log on to the video itself, and he's saying, are there certain levels of Salesforce orgs that require testing of this nature in order for companies to even use them for software? So he's saying, like, for ISVs.
So yes, there is no hard requirement to use the tool itself. It's basically, if you're concerned about security, you should be using it. ISVs also have a process where they go through a security review, which is, in essence, going through the static code analysis as well as a engineer reviewing, you know, the overall application and the design. So ISVs do utilize our product for readiness for security review. We do cover the things which are identified in the static code analysis phase of that review. So customers can, ISVs can utilize our solution to basically do this in-house before they start the security review process. So yeah, it's definitely a useful tool in that scenario as well.
Cool.
So basically the scan, of course, is completed. So we can look at the results and I can show you how that interface looks like. So basically the findings, like I said, are stored as Salesforce cases. So if you want to edit them, you get the standard, interface for case editing provided by Salesforce. But if you look at the results from the tool itself, when we find issues which are identified by the static analysis engine, we provide, a reference to the class or the controller that we found this issue in and the line number. We also give a code snippet of where we found this issue. And then we provide a fix on how to go about fixing this issue. So this particular issue is a very common issue that we find, deals with authorization bypass. When you're doing any CRUD functions, if you don't call proper methods before doing it, you may expose unauthorized changes in your environment. So we provide visibility into those. As you know, the code that is run on the server side has ability to change any records pretty much because it's on the server side. So you have to make sure that you check the person calling that code has the right permissions and what have you. So for this specific CRUD function, it would be, is deletable would be the method that we need to call and then, insert that object. We also provide, so the things that we find through runtime testing, we provide URLs. So here we found a SOCL injection. We provide a URL, we provide an ID, a variable of where we found it. And then here we again provide some guidance on how to go about fixing this issue. Similarly, the things that we find which are persistent, we provide a URL. So here's cross-site scripting issues that we've identified, which are again part of the OWASP top 10. And so customers can use these URLs and then, basically try to reproduce them and fix these issues. So here we find, if I can get it to launch. Cross-site scripting issues. So we're able to, exploit, provide guidance with, URLs on how to go about exploiting an issue. We're also able to find persistent issues. So let's say somebody comes and writes bad data to your database and it doesn't get rendered through a request or a response. But if it gets rendered when an admin is looking at it or somebody else is looking at it, it's still a bug that you would want to know. So the way we find these issues is that we will actually create malicious objects in the database, and then we'll call them from the different pages or the controllers or Visualforce components. And then we'll see how the application behaves. So that allows us to actually look at persistent issues, so things which reside within your backend, within the objects, malicious data, and then provide some guidance on how those will get exploited. So persistent cross-site scripting issues could be found as well.
Now, will your tool go and so you mentioned that like you create a malicious object. Will your tool then go in afterwards and delete what you created, or does it leave it there for an example to say, go load this and see what happens?
So it leaves it there because that malicious data we use for future tests as well. But
Okay.
you can remove them or purge them if you wanted to.
Okay.
Because when we create those objects, we keep tab of all the IDs, because then we would want to call and load them in the application itself. So instead of having to generate it every time, we save them, and all the new and the unique ones, we always generate them.
Okay.
So if there's a new field or new object, then we'll generate, malicious data for that one.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that's probably another reason why you don't want to run this in production, right? To have those.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, you definitely don't want to create, accounts with Unicode and, a huge amount of data for, someone's first name, last name, or what have you, or, special characters for phone numbers and what have you. So yeah, definitely not something that you would want to run in production, but there's a way to turn that feature off. So if somebody wanted to run this in production and they didn't want us to persist any data, you could always turn this off and then run the scan.
Okay.
So these issues can be triaged here as well. Folks can fix them, close the bugs. The tool itself saves all the findings sort of chronologically. So you could see, how you are doing across builds. And if, there's been changes in the code, how did that fare against, the tests that are made. And so you can see a trend, whether that's going up or down, and be able to look at key areas where you want to perhaps do more awareness or understanding for developers, and progress your security posture for the environment.
Cool.
So this is basically the tool and what it does, and this is available for companies to use. It's also available as a free tool, so companies can run a scan and find out how many issues they have, and then if it makes sense, they can invest in buying a license. The reason we wanted to do it this way is that if you are a company which has no idea of how your environments look like, you can always scan it and then understand, you have 30 or 40 or 20 high-risk issues that you should look at, and then make a decision that, yeah, we should invest in security and grab a license.
So is it one license per org, or is it per number of people running a scan? How does the licensing on that work?
It's per org.
Okay.
So if you have like one unique org, you buy one license. But if you have, multiple unique orgs, then you buy multiple licenses.
All right. So there are a couple more questions that we have. Is there more, or are you ready for some questions?
Sure. Yeah, let's take some questions.
And one that's just general. Is there a single most common vulnerability that you are finding, not your tool necessarily, but, I assume you work with companies and all this, and I know your data doesn't report back, so it may be a hard question to answer, but what do you see or think is the single most common vulnerability inside of Salesforce orgs today?
So I would say the number one issue is around authorization bypass. It's a not very well understood issue, and I went over this as well. As people assume that the platform makes sure that when you're making a call, only people who are authorized are getting the data. And one of the reasons ICANN was compromised was exactly this. They thought that they weren't they were okay with the permissions to confidential data, but if customers requested it, they were getting confidential data, or hackers requested it, they were getting confidential data. And so they ended up exposing that data over 300 times, 330 times. So that points to this common misunderstanding that once you deploy your data, it's secure, and your code will make sure that only people authorized to are going to be able to get to it. So I think the number one issue that we find is around authorization bypass. And it is actually the most impactful issue too, because in the end of the day, you're concerned about data, right? Data not getting in right, in the wrong person's hand. It should be only available to the right people who are authorized to do it. And there's a whole complex authorization model where you create roles and permissions. And all that could be useless if you have an authorization bypass bug. So that's one of the things that we find most is a lot of authorization bypass issues.
And so for some of the uninitiated, that's authorization bypass means it's not authentication. It's am I allowed to do the action that I'm requesting, correct?
Yeah, yep. So it is basically, yep. People who shouldn't have access to or be able to manipulate data, but then they end up, having access to it or be able to manipulate that data.
Gotcha. So are there any tips, suggestions that y'all have towards, when developers get in a room, we like to whiteboard and we like to architect and argue and discuss, we should do it X, Y, Z. Are there any steps we can take at that point in our process? Any things to be thinking about perhaps when we're just even at the whiteboard level to help us prevent from exposing bugs like this? I mean, if you have any tips or ideas with that, because I'm sure that's where I think that's probably where a lot of people overlook stuff is you're at the whiteboarding level and you get excited about a design idea and you go for it and then you realize later on like, oh, perhaps we should have maybe architected that a little different. Any input there?
Oh, that's a very good question. So I think part of it is the mindset, right? So no single solution can have the same controls. But as part of that whiteboarding session or the even initial discussions, if you have this question of, what are the security implications of what we're doing, goes a long way. I think security is invited last to the table, I often joke. And one of the reasons why we saw those configs in Salesforce was for perhaps the same reason. If they had those conversations, they would never allow a 5-character password on their platform. So I think as you're designing and brainstorming and even writing code, I think it's important to have this question asked and also addressed, that what are the security implications of bringing on this new feature onto the platform, and that would require some investigation. That's not a yes/no answer. That we're secure, we're using SSL, not that kind of question, but more in-depth understanding of what would be the implication of using this feature in this manner or this piece of code and getting this deployed. So I think tools like ours help raise awareness, but the best I think direction is utilizing our tools, but also having the awareness of, making sure that you are discussing security at the right time, and you don't ignore it, and you only look at it when you get breached, right?
Yeah, I fully relate to the whole conversation of the last to be invited to the table, because I used to think that way when I worked with a lot of ad agencies and we were the technical people and we were always the last invited to the show with this last minute deadline. But you're right. I mean, security, I'm guilty of it too. That's usually the last thing I think about. And to your point in the very beginning, like, hey, we're on this platform that maybe it's secure by default, or we all are kind of tricked into thinking that. And so this is very good, and it's very eye-opening. It makes me want to run this on every org I've been a part of just to see, right, and to keep myself in check, to make sure I'm remembering to do these things that we hope are basic. But I can tell you right now that there's code that I've written where I haven't done that, and luckily I don't think I've paid the price yet, but it's something to make you think about. So thank you very much for this. This is good. I think we will we'll put the links to the product, at least to your website, down in our comments down below in the description here. But do you have anything else you wanted to mention in closing, or?
Yeah, I mean, thank you again for hosting. I think it was a great conversation. I appreciate that. And to your point of wondering what's in your org, you're always welcome to do a free scan using our tryout which is available from our website. So, we encourage a lot of customers, those who are in the same boat as, what is out there, that they should go and have a look and at least do a free scan, and then to go from there. So we welcome everybody to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't beat free, right? And just to open your eyes, it may just be the piece that you need to get the higher ups to realize that while we're being the best stewards we possibly can of our data, there's stuff that we're not going to catch. Run this free tool just to at least check it out, and like you said, get security involved earlier rather than later. And this is a good way to kind of bring all of that to the forefront, especially considering, this whole hack with Experian or whatever recently, right? So it's on top of everybody's minds. Today's September 11th. And so security, and as far as that goes, is, it's top of mind today, which is another reason why we had you on. So thank you very much for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
Very informative. Yeah. So with that, we have kind of gone a little bit, not quite over. We like to try to keep them under an hour, so we're still there. But I just got a few more things I want to mention here. We have our next show should be in 2 weeks' time. I don't think we have a topic yet, but we will announce it as soon as we have one. And if you're interested in this DigitSec project or product, please reach out to that company, and we will make sure that you get the information that you need. I think I forgot to mention at the top of the show as well, we're still always looking, if you're looking for a position, or you need a position, or you're trying to hire for a position, reach out to us. We'll do the best we can to hook you up with somebody to help you find a place to go. And with that, thank you, Akas.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and we look forward to talking again sometime in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care.
I gotta stop the broadcast.